with development, anything that can cause the developer to basically put his hand in his pocket, so there's a cost, needs to be considered by the valuer.
You are listening to the Property Developer Podcast, your home for tips, ideas and inspiration to help take your developing to the next level. Now here's your host, Justin Getty.
Hello and welcome to episode 31 of the show. I'm glad you could join me. I trust you are well and your projects are on track. I have an interesting show for you today as we speak with a professional valuer about the valuation part of a development project. Before we get to that, here's an update on my projects. It's been a very busy couple of weeks. My 20 townhouse project is rapidly approaching settlement. I've obtained the statement of compliance from council, so they were happy I had satisfied the key conditions of my land subdivision permit. And the titles have been released by the bank to go off to the titles office for registering. Once we get those back, we can initiate settlement. We've had a few inspections, and so far we've had a couple of people actually move into their properties early under a license agreement. So that is nice that people can start living in their new home. On the second project, the public notice period has ended, and we received quite a lot of objections from the neighbours, including a local action group that is against development. So we're about to go through the community consultation process, which is led by council, to see if we can address the concerns that people have raised. We'll do our best to explain what we are trying to achieve and see if we can resolve some of the issues. Okay, on with the show. Today's guest is David Way from Knight Frank Valuations. Getting your valuations right is very important for securing acquisition funding, and exceptionally important when you apply for construction funding. The role of the valuer is an interesting one, as they are usually appointed by the lender to review your project to see if the values stack up. But they work closely with you on sourcing a lot of the reports and documents they need to complete their report. I enjoyed speaking with David, and the discussion really helped me better understand the role that valuers play. We talk about how valuers approach a valuation, how to best work with a valuer, and what to look out for in a valuation report. I started off by asking David what food he could eat until he was sick.
Oh, but that's probably easy. Pizza. I have set a few records over the years.
Pizza's becoming a common response. So
it is something. It tends to come after a few beers. So yeah, your ability to consume it increases exponentially after beer consumption.
And the desire too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any particular type of pizza?
Yeah, I do like an Hawaiian, but no one else does. So in the family, so I tend to get shuffled down the rung and try and pick the pineapple pieces off one with a lot. So
We'll go the old half and half.
Yeah, I do like a marinara too. If we get a good seafood operator in there, and it's
probably a Hawaiian and
top
a
shelf.
Marinara. That's not the most popular combinations on the pizzas.
No, that might be explain my personality, but anyway.
Well, David, we're here today to talk about valuations, and you're the leading valuing organisations across Australia.
Yep. So
we're going to talk about valuations for developers. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into valuation?
Right. Yeah. Well, funnily enough, I had to think about that when you put that question to me, and it was a school, careers advisor questionnaire, and I wanted to be a physiotherapist, and I filled out the form, and they came back and said, you'd be no good as a physiotherapist, but have you ever thought of being a property valuer? And I'd never heard of it. So,
can I ask why your answers indicated you'd be
I got no idea
good as a physiotherapist?
It was 1986, so it was too long ago to recall the exact questions and my answers. But there you go. Those things perhaps work. It was a bit of a shock. I went and had a chat to a friend who was a hotel broker, and also had a valuer on staff. And then I found out I had a cousin who was a valuer, and all of a sudden I made some further inquiries and thought, well, it's a hell of a lot easier, Mark, to get into property valuations than physiotherapy. So that was the other interesting part to it. So I thought, oh, well, I'll follow it and see how I go.
And so how did that unfold?
Oh, well, get through what was then HSC instead of VCE, and then off to RMIT, apply and got in, and 4 years Bachelor of Business, majoring in property, and then out the other side, straight into the early 90s recession, where I was made redundant and got in the queue with everyone else holding a bowl. But in some ways shapes you, in terms of what can happen, how it can happen, and at a young age, how you deal with it.
And so what kind of skills do valuers need, or do they teach you at university?
Yeah, so RMIT, typical of any university course, they give you the basics in terms of law, accounting, economics, probability. So there was some statistical work in there, which I actually quite liked. And then they narrowed in as the course got closer to its end in specific valuation principles. So a lot of rural content at the time, but yeah, zeroed in on specialties too. Hotel valuers came and spoke and all the rest of it. So it was always a pretty well structured course, the RMIT course, and I think from what I've heard, Deakin and Melbourne University both do a good job as well.
So it's not just a dark art.
No, there's a little bit of background. I mean, some developers might wonder what's going on in a valuer's head at times and think there's some black magic being performed. But no, there's a base for everything, and that's the stepping stone to get going. Yeah.
And I've always thought that valuers, maybe this is just for residential property, pretty conservative when it comes to valuations.
Yep.
What's your view on that?
Yeah, look, they are, and the typical purpose of a valuation that you might come across being a developer yourself is for first mortgage purposes. So as soon as you put the purpose along with the valuation task, market value as is or as if complete in the case of proposed townhouses or apartments, the valuer's job is to consider the security that's been put to the bank and the risks. I think you've had some financial people on your podcast in over 2016, and there's probably a bit of a theme there, risk. So with risk comes perhaps a conservative position. Having said that, it's not the valuer's job to determine market value and then drop it by 10% to feel comfortable, because that doesn't help anyone either. It causes all sorts of grief in terms of settlement issues and the like, and valuers own property too, and the day will come where it's flipped around and they experience a bit of pain, and they'll see that it's more appropriate to get the value right, make sure that it's well founded, that the risks are assessed, and there's good market evidence in behind it, which is got some currency about it.
Yes, well, risk is definitely a big element of developing.
Absolutely.
So you talked about the first mortgage being the reason that a lot of valuations are initiated. Who does the valuer actually work for? Is it the bank or the developer? Because we generally pay for the report.
That's probably the nub of the developer's difficulty in understanding the valuer's role and where they sit and where everyone sits. There's no doubt in my mind, I work as an independent to determine the security for the bank. So I'm effectively an adjunct of the bank. And like all good banks, they pass on their costs. And so the developer pays for the privilege. I mean, in the good old days, it might have been what they would have called a mortgage establishment fee, but they don't use that term too much anymore. But it's part and parcel of applying for a loan, and the valuer steps in front of the process and determines the value of that security. So the ultimate test is if the bank has to realise the asset, what's someone going to pay? That's not the developer that's already in the property. It's the hypothetical third party purchaser.
Yeah, well, I was going to come to that, but seeing as you've raised it, might as well discuss that. So I know that's one of the key elements or components of a valuation report is what happens if you have to sell it quickly. So can you just talk us through your thinking behind that?
Yeah, well, look, interesting that you used the term quickly. We probably use the term, under an appropriate marketing and sales campaign. So the conundrum for the developer is, I don't want to sell, but if he's lost control of the asset, then the test is the bank sells the property out of market value within a reasonable time frame. And if the market has tanked, it's what a purchaser will pay. It's got nothing to do with the vendor. So, the purchaser then determines the market, and the depth of those purchases will then determine how well you go in realising the asset. So this is where some developers get confused because they see perhaps a cash flow or a hypothetical development model, and it's got things like stamp duty in the assessment, and they're confused because they've already paid it. That's not that. Why have you got in there? I've already paid it. It's not going to be. It's not the test. The test is the next developer in, or the next purchaser in, has to pay stamp duty, and so that's why it's sitting there.
And then what about some of the other key parts of the valuation report?
Yep.
What are the key parts that you're looking for and developers should know about?
Look, I think the valuation reports for development can be quite detailed. Like everything, it all starts with your legal right to the property. So a title is number one, and unfortunately, in our world now, the title or the requirement for value is to consider title as on standard residential has been waived by the banks to get the process quicker and a bit cheaper. But in a development funding valuation, that's very much we search the title, we search the instruments, we try to determine if there are any risk associated with encumbrances on the title. So that's step one. And then step two is your planning, and have you, where are you at? And once again, we're looking at risk elements, and the risk elements can be reduced through, achieving a planning permit and endorsed plans. So that's locked away. We know what we've got. And then we start looking at the conditions, and are there conditions within that that permit which lead to further questions regarding, an environmental audit or contributions to council. In the case of a subdivision permit, public open space contributions. So with development, anything that can cause the developer to basically put his hand in his pocket, so there's a cost, needs to be considered by the valuer. So permit's pretty important. And then, we start to look at the proposed improvements, detailed specifications. Critically, things like ceiling heights are quite often overlooked, number of lifts. Everything should be reconciled, so the developer should really understand fully what he's got and what he's building. Sometimes they change the plans that often that they lose sight of what it is that they've actually got, and they present the valuers with plans that are old, they need currency, and they need to reconcile with all the various reports that go with it. So quantity surveyors, architects, everyone needs to be aligned, and you'd be amazed how often they're not.
I actually don't know that I wouldn't be amazed in the number of reports that get done. And
well, this is it. And when you're in the developer's seat and they're having to move quickly and dealing with all sorts of consultants, it can sometimes be lost. So if you've got this pain in the neck valuer who keeps coming back at you all the time to get a reconciliation and documentation, it's a good thing. So it means that you're not going to get those questions in when the valuation arrives at the bank and it's too late, or it means another valuation to consider changes or whatever. You don't want that. So then you look at market situations in terms of stock, and obviously looking at standard, we're looking at evidence, compiling evidence on land and on completed product. For apartments, off the plan, we look at off the plan sales and sale rates. We also look at resale rates for existing stock because they can be quite two different levels of value. Looking at obviously what we touched on with the permits, but the costs, so we can come up with a feasibility to determine profit, because the bank will want to see that there's a reasonable profit in anything that they fund, and then we certify it, basically say it's true and correct. We've done our best and followed the rules in terms of. There are standard instructions from banks and also from the API and RICS.
And I also note there's always a caveat in there.
Yeah, look, there's plenty of qualifications.
It might change.
Yeah, look, there's a 90-day shelf life on them.
Yeah.
So you do need to get your timing right when you engage the valuer. At the same time, the valuer needs to be flexible enough to get his inspection date right. No point charging out their day one of the instruction when you know the developer's going to drip feed you over a 3-month period, time you run. Probably doesn't matter if it's in Richmond. It's not far to pop back again and refresh, but those sorts of nothing worse than a developer getting a report and there's 12, 15 days left of shelf life with it, and he's got to go back and ask for it again.
Yeah, I remember getting the list from the valuer, which was you guys, of all the things I had to provide for the valuation reports, about as long as my arm. Yeah, and look, you feel sort of, is it necessary? And quite often we'll get a developer come back a bit grumpy and say, I'm paying you to do it. You find out. That adversarial sort of approach to the process doesn't help. It's a hindrance. It slows things down. As I said, we're running in parallel lines, but we're still working together in some ways. So whilst we're independent, we're not being engaged as an advisor. We're being engaged as an independent expert. We still run parallel with the developer, and the better the developer organises their information and assists with the process, the quicker it's done, the better it's done. You get a better result in terms of quality of the report and how it moves through a credit unit at a bank, because the bank's then got another credit process in which they review the valuation. And if it's highly qualified because the developer didn't want to play, they thought this was just a pain in the ass process, I don't want to be part of it. The worst case is that the valuation is not believable or it's highly qualified and you don't get your money. So that's been a waste of time, money, effort, all of the above. Reiterate that it's much better if the developer gets off on the right foot with the valuer and nothing wrong with asking questions why you need that information, and then it should be properly explained. And tell me, is it harder, easier to do valuations in a stable, rising or falling market?
It's harder to do them in a falling market because the evidence dries up typically, or the evidence is more difficult to obtain, and for some in the market they deem some of the evidence to be tainted or forced. But unfortunately, when you're in a falling market, forced evidence is, as I said, the purchaser drives the sale to a degree. The vendor puts the property to market over an orderly campaign, and if the best 3 offers are 20% below where he started, well, that's the market. And that's when it gets really tricky, because then the vendor, if they're not under any pressure, they go, well, I'm not selling. So it's back off the market, so you don't have any evidence.
And what about in a rising market? I guess you've got a bit of buffer there, but do you also get developers going, well, you valued it at point A, but I know that in a month, 3 months or 6 months, it's going to be higher again, and that's where I see the value.
Yeah. So we can't forecast, and we can't provide you future values. We're not insured to do so. So all we can give you is the here and now, and that can be improved if the value is on top of his game and has currency of evidence. That you're looking at the valuation date of April 2017, that he's got 2017 evidence, early 2017 evidence. If he's referring to 2014 or 15 market, then, it's a waste of time. So, having said that, there's sometimes particular property sectors where there's lack of evidence and you need to go back that far, particularly for specialty or unusual locations. But once again, it's then beholden on the valuer to explain his position and how he's adjusted for time and all the rest of it. But he can't give you a future value, unfortunately. No forecasting, no crystal ball.
If only we had one of those.
That's right. We'd all be. I don't know what we'd all be doing. We'd all be probably chasing the same marble if we all had the crystal ball. But anyway,
that's right. I just want to go back and cover some of the things that you've already mentioned when you were going through the process of the valuation. You said you were looking for encumbrances. So what are the kind of typical things that you're looking for that can cause problems?
Look, sometimes it can be something very simple, like a single dwelling covenant on a title. It's not the end of the world, but it will, if you're in an estate in which the benefactors of that covenant realise that a multi-dwelling development is proposed, they might enforce it. So that's in a simple sort of context. Easements, right-of-way easements. You're taking away someone's ability to access a piece of land that's landlocked or something like that. And we're always looking for things like that. Also, public infrastructure easements for larger parcels of land, and sometimes we've seen some wacky plans that don't have regard to even access over such easements that in terms of or under easements, or the removal of easements, or the reinstatement of an easement or movement, picked up and shifted. Then you've got 173 agreements. They're more common now with council. It's basically a tool for council to say, well, we'll give you a planning position if you do this for us. And that's where you might have to rebuild an intersection, put in traffic lights, and it's a cost to the development. So you got your permit, which had an extraordinary outcome in terms of yield, but the offset was that you had to put in $200,000 or $300,000 in roadworks. So all those sorts of things we're looking at, and typically they're attached to the title.
And hopefully the developer would be already aware of those things.
Look, 999 times out of 1,000, they are. Occasionally a little instrument sitting on an older title, a 1950s title, it gets missed. They're the ones that we sort of go, oh, have you considered this? It's like, oh. Even something like a simple thing like a caveat. Caveat's a registration of a pecuniary interest in the property. And if our valuation is based on a readily saleable property, if there's a caveat on it, it's not readily saleable until you remove it. So simple things like that.
Okay, and then you talked about plans and permits.
Yep.
And the impact that might have on a valuation.
Yep.
So can you talk us through what you're looking at in terms of value of the raw land, I suppose, versus an uplift in value?
Yep.
With the granting of permits or a permit.
So, the permit provides the effectively your outcome. This is what I'm going to build. The valuer's job is to determine whether that's an extraordinary outcome, a middle of the road outcome, or an underperforming outcome where there might be another higher and better use. So sometimes the value is actually, if it's just a valuation of land as is, you might ignore the permit. You might say, look, that's they've got a permit for 6 townhouses and you can build 50 apartments. Or that has to be, the value is beholden to come up with the highest and best use, except if it's a construction funding valuation where, we've had instances in the past where a family might be wanting to build, 3 boutique whole floor apartments and not take advantage of another 3 levels. And so you end up with a term called project-related site value, which some of the banks like to hear, some of them don't. But it's a real test of that specific project and what the land value might be if as a starting point, and construction gets going. There's no turning back. Extraordinary permits where they add value is if they've achieved something or taken risk away that might be above and beyond what the general planning scheme is offering. There's always the cost and time value of them. In this market where sites are chased very hard and in fact developers are almost paying in advance for a standard sort of planning outcome, there's no added value to the permit. But where they've achieved, if the preferred maximum was 5 levels and they've got 10, you've got to then step back from it and say, typically the land would have been worth this. With the permit, it's now worth something more, but the risk is there because the permit has a life. If it's not acted upon, you could fall back again. So they're the sorts of things that we juggle.
And when you talk about an example where you might get a permit for 3 levels, where in actual fact you could probably get 6.
Yeah.
So do you make the bank aware of that, or the lender that
Yep.
perhaps is not the highest and best use?
Yeah, look, just plucking a few numbers, but you might say, well, the project-related site value under the construction funding deal that's in front of you is $2 million, but if you sold it without the development going ahead and it was reconsidered by the next purchaser in, it might sell for $4 million. So, that happens actually a fair bit. You'd be surprised how often, particularly with the townhouse market and some smaller apartments in the outer suburbs where the builder-developer is very dominant. They don't, in order to compete, they look at a building profit and tend to forget about the developer profit. And so the competition is very, very hot for those sites, and therefore sometimes they get a bit of a rude shock because once again we're valuing it for the bank, and that if it falls over at a point of the construction cycle, that are you going to sell to another owner builder, or are you going to sell to a developer who will engage a builder? And so you might find there's a conservative position taken there. So that's something else that can cause a bit of grief for developers, but it all varies market to market.
Okay. And you also mentioned looking at things like resale rates,
Yeah.
which I'm guessing that's related to apartment projects primarily.
Yep.
Where do you get those figures from?
Yeah, so the resales are available through government databases. They're available through the various real estate institute databases. They're pretty freely available to a valuer. And the tricky bit is getting the actual property information. The sales information, I think we've got to sign a privacy statement to get a vendor and purchaser details through the government databases. But generally, that part of it's the easy bit, and we can always pick up the phone, and it's always preferred that the valuer is engaged in the market and speaking to the agents to verify a sale and get a feel for whether it was it was these guys and no one behind them, or there was 6 or 7 people in behind them, so it'd sell again in a heartbeat at a similar sort of value. That's really important. So that evidence is pulled together, but the tricky bit's the actual size, how many cars, some detail around the quality, all those sorts of things are hard to gather. But given that we've been in the apartment space for such a long time, we've got a lot of that information in our own data sets, so we're probably ahead of the game there.
So there's no one single source of truth?
No.
Data.
Look, I'm sure there's a giant conglomerate out there trying to do it, or they are trying to do it at the moment, to automate the valuation process, and you might find one day residential applications for residential loans are completely automated, and the valuer might be just a data gatherer rather than coming up with a specific number. It might be a computer generated thing, and they've got to have quality information to get a quality outcome. So I'm not sure they're at the quality information point, and that's the tricky bit, getting really good, accurate data as a base, because if it's rubbish at the start, you'll get a rubbish result.
And you just mentioned quality, which was in relation to the finishes of a product. How do you assess quality?
Yeah, I assess quality. Well, it needs to be considered in the context of the location too. So that's the first step. No point building a Brighton quality of product in a market that can't pay for it. So that's a simple sort of first step. Have a look at it. Is it suitable for the market which is going to be built? And then you start looking at the structure critically, because I get told quite often it's a premium product. It's got X, it's high quality appliances and the rest of it. And then I find out the ceiling heights are 2,500. That's not quality. So, if your structure is, if there hasn't been money going into the structure and provides space and a good base, then no matter how good your fixtures and finishes are, they only have a certain life really in terms of the value component. If you've got an investment, for instance, 5 to 10 years, you've run your depreciation down there with nothing. And in some ways that's correct in the market. People are looking to change them over within 5 to 10 years. So they're the trinkets, if you like, but the real quality goes into the frame, the lifts, the basement, the quality of all those sorts of things that you can't fix again. There can't be, I'll go in and adjust the ceiling heights. That ain't going to happen, But I can change the oven and the hot plate over, So I look at the nuts and bolts, the core of the building, to determine the quality and the panels used. And in a seaside location, too much poor quality material will see a rapid deterioration. So you need to get those sorts of things sorted out.
Okay, so a lot to consider.
Yeah, look, we are on it, and the more you do, the better you get at it. So that's the trick with it. You just got to keep doing them, and you learn something every day.
And what kind of relationship should the developer and the valuer have? I mean, is it a short-term relationship just for the valuation for the lending?
Look, I don't think a developer should be wedded to one valuer. I think it makes sense that due to conflicts, or when I say conflicts in terms of a commercial arrangement where, if you bought the site off Knight Frank, I'm not going to value it for you for settlement. Okay, so you need to have a good relationship with a couple of your trusted valuers who you've worked well with in the past, and you're able to pick the phone up and talk to. As I said, they're independent. They've got to consider the bank's position, but you might have a question on, what we're talking about, a quality element, and will it be properly recognised in the market? You speak, bounce a few ideas off the valuer, and hopefully they give you some reasonable advice. Also, currency of evidence, or you might be speaking to the valuer on certain events. For instance, introduction of stamp duty, that's increases that are coming in mid-year again. I'm getting asked all the time impacts on that. Land tax increases with new assessments at the moment. I'm getting asked a lot of queries on that. So if you've got a valuer and a good relationship with the valuer, you can pick the phone up and say, what's this all about? How's it going to hurt me?
And if someone's looking to establish a relationship or find a valuer,
yep,
what kind of questions should they be asking, or how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, look, it's trial and error. Sorry. I mean, you can
expect a valuer to be saying that.
Well,
some kind of process to go through.
Well, look, it's like anything. How did you get your architect? How did you get your quantity surveyor? How did you ask contemporaries in the market who they use, what their experience was like, will that particular professional suit this type of development? Will he charge me too much and take too long for something that's straightforward? But then I might want, the risk taken out of it, and I'm happy to do that. It really comes down to the individual and their circumstances, and then once you get a portfolio of projects or bank of projects that you've done, you start to establish your own team, and a valuer can once again I talk about this independence. You can have a valuer as part of your suite of consultants, as you would a quantity surveyor who's also independent.
I wanted to ask you that question about at what stages you would engage a valuer. We've talked about first mortgage for lending, and then also construction funding.
So first mortgage again.
So
when do you start talking to the valuer?
Or are there other times?
Oh, look, there are other times. Right at, when you're in a bidding process, and you can have the chat. I mean, you can get pre-purchase advice. Generally, we come in when you want to settle the land, and once again when you want to develop the land. So, and there might be some conversations and some meetings along the way just for you to present what you're thinking, and if there's any feedback. But it's generally that sort of process where we get involved. But there's probably a developing element of the consultancy at the start, and establish a position in terms of market evidence that you might be able to get your hands on. Equally, you're talking about a rising market. Sometimes a valuer will give you a position at a point in time, and then when you finally go to bid, it's moved. You've got to be nimble enough to read the market as well, and know that perhaps that number's been left behind, and that you've got a range that you might have been comfortable to move in. But look, I encourage every developer to pick the phone up and talk to the valuer and have the chats when required.
So would there be any benefit to then sitting down with the valuer before they begin the valuation, say for your construction funding?
Yeah, absolutely.
To say, look, here's the project, here's what we want to do,
Sure.
Here's our vision, we're doing X, Y, Z.
Yep.
Is there benefit to that?
Absolutely. Yep. There's particularly, we get that a lot with really big projects because it's a lot to understand and take in, and quite often they don't have a particular bank in mind. They might take it to 2 or 3 banks because some banks are interested in that market and funding. Some are out. Some change their mind in between because of directions from above and how their books weighted and what sort of thing. So you can never assume a bank, or you might have a relationship with a bank. Some banks prefer to control the valuation process. That's the other thing. So you've got to be a bit careful that you don't step on toes if you go to the valuer directly. When you're a particular bank who says, no, the valuer's working for me, I'll organise the valuer. You stay there and
pay the bill
and cool your jets and pay the bill. But we want to we want to get the construction right. We want to make sure that what we need as a bank and a credit unit is articulated in the report. So once again, it's trial and error. Unfortunately, every bank will be different, and even in tiers of banks, they'll have a different approach. But understand your market, ask lots of questions, ask questions of your banker, get the banker to ask credit. So I know that's what you think. Can you just do me the favour of go and ask credit if they're happy for me to use Knight Frank Valuations, make sure they're on the panel, all those sorts of things. So that's pretty important.
It's good that you brought up the panel for the banks.
Yep.
I had a question around whether you can save any time bringing a valuer on prior to applying for your construction funding.
Yep.
Because I know it's taking longer and longer.
Yep.
3-4 plus months now from start to finish to apply for construction funding, which
Yep.
sort of slows things down, and the valuation report is a key part of that, as is the quantity surveyor's report.
Yeah.
If you were to engage a valuer who was on a common across a number of panels prior to the application,
Yep.
within whatever your shelf life of your reports are,
90 days.
90 days, is that a way of potentially saving 4 or 5 weeks when you apply?
Absolutely.
Because you've already got the valuation report to go.
Yeah, once again, timing's everything. So there's no point getting a valuation for construction funding. It's qualified because your quantity surveyor hadn't been able to verify a construction contract. That takes another 4 months. You've got to get your timing right. So, it's a preference of a number of banks for the quantity surveyor's report to sit as an appendix within the valuation, because the valuer is then beholden to articulate that we're talking about the same development. The references to the architectural plans or the stamp plans are the same. The number of apartments are the same. The number of car spaces being provided are the same. So those sorts of simple checks, everything's consistent. What the bank don't like is when the valuer said there's 173, the quantity surveyor said there's 192, and the final plans come through on secondary consent as 160, which is common in this market because a lot of owner-occupiers are up and about and are putting apartments together. That is effectively a cross. They're just going to throw it back. So you've got to get your timing right, but you can only get your timing right by engaging early and timing your run with all of these moving parts.
And a good valuer should be able to guide you through that,
Correct.
I would imagine.
Yep, for sure. And look, a lot of quantity surveyors at the moment seem to want the valuation as part of their report, and that's part of this reconciliation again. They want to make sure that we're all talking the same language. I'd probably argue it's the other way around. The valuation should have the quantity surveyor's report, because there's nothing that we do in terms of our opinion that the quantity surveyor uses. So they're not using the value of the land. They've got no interest in that. The value of the apartments when they're complete, they've got no interest in that. But we have a real interest in what they verify as a construction number, what they tell us is an appropriate construction period, and even a month-to-month drawdown can be quite sensitive to a profit outcome. So we're very zoned in on their report.
I wanted to ask about that relationship between the valuer, the quantity surveyor, and the bank, and how that works. You outline that a little bit, but I'm always curious because the quantity surveyor wants the valuer's report, the valuer wants the quantity surveyor's report, and they're sort of they are being done in parallel quite often.
Yeah, once again, the parallel independent experts that are a requirement to get a lending facility outcome. The good valuer should be able to pick the phone up and quite regularly ring the quantity surveyor and be able to chat with them about why there might be variations, why there might be differences in what plans were you using, just to get a fit, rather than just throw it back and say they don't match, try again. Try and work. I mean, really, it's appropriate to try and flag with the developer, hey, guess what, these are out. Forgot to send them the secondary consent plans. They were using the old endorsed plans from 7 months ago. So you really need to work together. There's maybe some commentary in the quantity surveyor's report that the value should understand before they just assume. And as I said, my position, I've already said it on who should come first. I think the quantity surveyor should complete his report before the valuer finishes his, because we're more reliant on what they say than they are the other way around.
So what mistakes do you see or can see developers getting into from a valuation perspective?
Mistakes. Mistakes is an interesting word. As I said, that consistency of documentation, is it a mistake? Look, nothing's incorrect until, you've started a process, it's complete, and then you realise that it's got to be redone. That's a mistake. So that getting that currency of information, getting everyone on the same page, the one page, and that can be tricky when a development's evolving. So it's the critical thing is there's no point giving someone an endorsed plans when that they're not what you're going to build. Give them the endorsed plans and say, look, that locks in our building envelope. We've got that planning risk out of the way. And I'll give you those plans, but please don't rely on them. Here's what we're going to provide under secondary consent. This is what we're actually going to build because we've adjusted to the market, and this is what fits the market. And so that might be a qualifier. So we'll qualify a report that's stamped. That's pretty common, particularly, as I said, in an evolving market. You need to get your funding to get comfort to sign the builder. There's all these sorts of things that are moving around. So there's always going to be some qualifications. Mistakes. The mistakes can come with getting the product wrong, getting price points beyond a market. Equally, potentially pitching to a market where the market's saturated. It's those sorts of things where the value will step back and go, oh, gee, I don't know if they've really understood where this suburb is at the moment. Some of the apartment proposals in outer suburban principal activity centres. The councils are zoning these places for development, but the market hasn't quite got there yet. You know what I mean? And they'll throw up a proposal that was never going to fly. There's those sorts of things. But that's part and parcel of developing too. You test it, doesn't work, you go back to the drawing board, try again, you do something different. But it's better that you probably thought of all that through before you secure the site, because you've obviously got to carry it. But there's sort of the things we work through in terms of mistakes in inverted commas.
And then can you just give us a bit of a run through of where you're seeing the various markets at the moment?
Yep. I think the investment tower market's going to take a pause. High stock levels came online last year. There's another high amount of stock coming online this year. There's a lot of reports in the paper about oversupply. We use the vacancy rates as a test of oversupply, and that's still sitting around 3%, which is equilibrium. So it means the market's in balance, and your rents aren't going up, they're not going down. So that investment market is, for every apartment that they release, they're getting a tenant. And then that's what the investor wants to pay the bills. So the banks have withdrawn from that market to some degree, not across the board. A good development's a good development, and they'll look at all of it, but they are definitely pulling back. And so we're going to have a bit of a dip in apartment completions, beyond 2018. But the really hot market at the moment is, in terms of my space, apartments and townhouses is the owner-occupier space, and that's across the board. Obviously, more inner suburban to middle suburban apartments are going really well. High quality lifestyle locations going well, and then townhouses as you move out. For owner occupiers, whether it be a high quality townhouse in Kew or a lower priced, affordable entry point townhouse for a first home buyer in Keysborough or Melton or wherever. They're going really well. So the owner occupiers dominate the market at the moment.
And can you talk us through, when you talk about big towers, and there's been a lot of speculation in the media about valuations being lower than what people paid for them. Can you talk us through about how that happens and the implications of that?
Yeah. So up until, 1 July 2017, the rules changed a bit. There was always an off-the-plan concession for duty, and that could work out roughly to 4%, particularly when you get a low land value component, a very tall tower, small investment apartment with a low value component. There were quite significant stamp duty savings, so there's 4%. You're buying something, or the purchaser's buying something brand new, so it's why do you buy a Mercedes and drive it out of the showroom only to know that as soon as you put a few clicks on the clock, it's worth less. That's another element to it. There's full depreciation benefits as opposed to something that may be 5 years old. The other element, and probably critical in this market, has been the speculative element that takes 6 months of sitting on. You've got your thumb on a contract. There's 6 months before it gets built. It takes 2 years to build, and I haven't had to do anything other than provide a 10% deposit. And then there's a 10% deposit, and then there's a balance to be paid. So that's probably critical, that it's been that delayed settlement that has meant an uplift in a pre-sale position, as opposed to if you've got to buy 10% now, balance in 60 to 90 days. Yeah.
All right. What's your one tip for developers out there?
Yeah, look, like we've talked about, engage with the valuer, get organised with your documentation. Don't feel like it's a confrontational engagement. Work together. Work together to get the right documents to the valuer to avoid confusion and delays, and you come up with a good result.
And just a light-hearted question to finish.
Yeah.
If you could sit down for dinner with any three people, alive or dead, who would they be?
Well, I try to, if I'm having dinner, I'm trying to not talk property, because I talk property every day of the week, so I have a little bit of a break. So I like horse racing, wine and football, so it'd be Lee Friedman, James Halliday and Mike Fitzpatrick would be the three. I'd like to have a medium rare steak with a Cabernet and some hot English mustard and maybe some cheese at the end.
All right. Well, David Way, thank you so much for being on the Property Developer Podcast. I appreciate you sharing all your information and ideas about valuation with us.
Thanks, Justin. Appreciate it.
See you later.
Good on you.
Okay, there you go. Everything you need to know about valuers and valuations. I enjoyed my chat with David and took away these key points. 1. Try to develop a good relationship with a quality valuer. Having a good valuer among your team of consultants can really help you fine-tune your feasibility or strengthen your loan application. You can speak with them about when to start the valuation process, key issues or challenges to address, and what they can help with. This can make a big difference to a lender looking favourably upon your application and how it is assessed, which will help things move along as smoothly as possible. But it is good to remember that the valuation report for a lending application is commissioned by the lender, and the valuer is really appointed by them to prepare an independent valuation report, not a glossy document that makes you look good. 2. Keep all your latest reports and information in one place to provide to the valuer. The list of documents the valuers need is often really long, so I try and keep all the final reports or key documents that are prepared for me in a Dropbox folder, so I don't have to go digging around for them when they are needed. I find I refer to these reports quite frequently anyway, so it is good having them all in one place. So try to keep a copy of all your final or latest reports in an easy to access place to save you time in the future. 3. Understand what the valuer is trying to achieve. You need to remember that the valuer is an independent consultant, although you can still work with them to get the best outcome. Understand that they are independent and doing a job, usually ultimately for the lender and not the developer, but that doesn't mean you can't work together to get the best result. Try and provide the latest, most accurate information you can, and keep them posted if anything changes. It's in your best interest to try and make their job as easy as possible. Alright, there you go. I hope you enjoyed that conversation about valuation. I certainly enjoyed bringing it to you. Don't forget, you can always head over to the show's website, www.propertydeveloperpodcast.com, and leave a comment on this episode's show notes. That's episode 31. Or you can find me on Facebook and Instagram under Property Developer Podcast. Thanks again for listening in, and until next time, may all your valuations come in as expected.
You've been listening to the Property Developer Podcast. Tune in next time for more tips, ideas, and inspiration to take your developing to the next level. For more developing love, make sure to visit propertydeveloperpodcast.com.